beneath every technique that has ever worked for anyone, whether they understood why it worked or not. Your imagination is the creative power of the universe operating through you. And what you assume to be true, not what you wish, not what you hope, but what you assume, in the deep and settled sense of that word, will, by the very nature of consciousness, become your experience. This is not metaphor. I want to be careful about that word because metaphor implies a comparison between two different things. It is like this. What I am describing is not like anything else. It is the actual structure of how experience comes into being. You are not living in a world and occasionally influencing it with your thoughts. You are continuously creating the world you live in through the assumptions you hold, most of which, for most people, were never chosen, only absorbed, and are now operating with the silent persistence of habit. If this is true, and I assure you it is, then the obvious question arises, why isn't everyone living their ideal life? Why do so many people, sincere and intelligent people, remain in circumstances that do not reflect what they say they desire? The answer is simple, though its implications are vast. Most people are creating unconsciously. They are planting seeds in the fertile soil of the subconscious mind through years of repetitive habitual thought and feeling. And those seeds, faithfully, are growing into the exact circumstances that surround them. The person trapped in cycles of lack is not unlucky. They have been planting lack season after season without knowing they were planting anything at all. But here is the truth that changes everything. You can choose what seeds you plant. Right now, regardless of your current circumstances, the soil does not care what has been planted in it before. It will grow whatever is planted in it next with exactly the same faithfulness. The first step in conscious creation is precision, and precision is where most people's efforts dissolve before they have even properly begun. I want to be successful. I want to be happy. I want things to get better. These are not assumptions. They are gestures in the general direction of an assumption, vague enough that the subconscious has nothing definite to work with, and vague enough that you yourself do not know in any felt sense what you are actually asking to become. The subconscious does not respond to categories. It responds to scenes, to specific, vivid sensory impressions of a particular reality. So before anything else, before any practice of feeling or assumption, you must know precisely what you are imagining. Not success, but a specific morning in a specific life. What do you see when you wake? What is the first thing you do, and how does it feel to do it? Not happiness, but a specific moment, a specific conversation, a specific quality of ease moving through a specific room. The more particular the scene, the more clearly you are communicating with the only part of you that actually builds anything. This is not because the universe needs detailed instructions, the way a contractor needs a blueprint. It is because vagueness in the image produces vagueness in the feeling, and feeling, not image, is the actual creative agent. A vague image cannot generate a specific feeling. And without a specific feeling, there is no impression. And without impression, there is no creation. Here is the step that determines everything else. You must assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. Not someday, not when conditions allow, but now. This instruction confuses people because it seems to ask them to feel something that is not, by the evidence of their senses, true. But this confusion arises from a misunderstanding about the nature of the subconscious mind, and once the misunderstanding is cleared, the instruction becomes not only sensible but inevitable. The subconscious does not experience time the way the conscious mind does. It does not organize experience into past, present, and future. It knows only the now, only what is being impressed upon it in this moment. If you continually impress upon it the feeling that your desire belongs to the future, that it is not yet, that it is coming, that it is still to be achieved, then the subconscious receives exactly that, not yet. And it constructs, faithfully, a future that continues to recede, because not yet is the only impression it has ever been given. But if you impress upon it the feeling of fulfillment now, if in this moment you feel what you would feel if your desire were already an accomplished fact, the subconscious receives that. It does not ask whether the physical world agrees. It simply begins, immediately and tirelessly, to construct the physical expression of what it has been told is already true. This is not pretending. I want to address this directly because the word pretending implies a kind of dishonesty, a performance you know to be false. What I am describing is the opposite of dishonesty. It is the recognition that consciousness is the primary reality, and that what is true in consciousness is, in the deepest and most operative sense, more real than what has not yet appeared in the physical world. To assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled is not to lie about your circumstances. It is to tell the truth about what is occurring in the only realm where truth is actually established, and to allow the physical world, which is always secondary, to come into alignment with it. How then do you actually do this? Begin by quieting the conscious mind, not through force, but through the kind of relaxation that approaches the edge of sleep without crossing into it. The chattering inner voice, the worries, the rehearsals of the day, these need not be fought. They simply need space to settle, the way water settles when it is no longer being stirred. As they settle, the subconscious becomes more accessible. The door that is usually held shut by the activity of ordinary thinking begins to open. In this quieted state, construct your scene. Keep it simple. Not a story with a beginning and an end, not an elaborate sequence of events, a single moment. A moment that could only exist in the reality where your desire is already fulfilled. If you desire a fulfilling career, perhaps it is the moment of sitting at your desk, a colleague pausing to say something appreciative, and you receiving it with the unremarkable ease of someone for whom this kind of recognition is simply part of daily life. If you desire financial abundance, perhaps it is the moment of glancing at an account balance, not with the drama of shock or celebration, but with the quiet, almost bored confirmation of something already known. This simplicity is not a limitation, it is the entire point. A single, simple scene can be entered completely. An elaborate one keeps you managing details, which keeps you in the position of the author, constructing a story rather than the person living a moment. And this is the crucial shift. Do not watch the scene, be in it. There is a precise difference between imagining a scene as something displayed before you and experiencing a scene as the world around you. The first keeps you as an observer, separate, at a distance, still in the position of someone who does not yet have what they are looking at. The second places you inside the reality itself, and inside is the only place creation occurs. I want to be honest about where this practice typically breaks down, because naming the failure precisely is more useful than describing the success. People learn to construct the scene. They can see it clearly, the office, the bank statement, the conversation, the room, and they stop there, believing the visual clarity is the work. But a clearly seen scene without feeling is a photograph, not an experience. It represents the desire. It does not impress it. The feeling is what gives the scene its creative life. Not a performed emotion, not an exaggerated burst of enthusiasm manufactured for the occasion, but the genuine, embodied sense of what it is like to be the person for whom this scene is simply true. The gratitude that does not announce itself, because there is nothing unusual to be grateful for. It is simply how things are. The ease that comes from no longer needing anything, because the need has already been met. The quiet satisfaction that belongs to someone who is not striving toward this moment, but living inside it. When you can generate this feeling, when the scene stops being something you are imagining and becomes, even briefly, something you are experiencing, you have done the actual work. Everything else is repetition and persistence, deepening what has already, in that moment, been accomplished. Here is something worth understanding about repetition because it explains both why the practice works and why a single attempt is rarely sufficient. The first time you bring your attention to a new scene, to a new assumption, there will likely be resistance, not dramatic resistance, but the friction of unfamiliarity. The feeling may come only partially or briefly or alongside an awareness that you are doing an exercise. This is not failure. It is simply the first pass of the needle across a groove that has not yet been worn into the record. Return to the same scene again and again. Each time the feeling comes a little more readily, stays a little longer, requires a little less effort to access. The groove deepens. What once required deliberate construction begins to arise on its own. The scene and its feeling becoming, through repetition, less like something you are doing and more like somewhere you are simply able to be almost at will. This is the mechanism by which a deliberately chosen assumption becomes a dominant state, the background hum of your consciousness, rather than an occasional exercise you perform and then set aside. And it is the dominant state, not the occasional exercise, from which creation actually proceeds. The subconscious responds to what is consistently impressed upon it, not to what is impressed upon it for 5 minutes and then contradicted for the remaining 23 hours and 55. This brings us to what Neville called living in the end. And I want to be precise about what this means because it is often misunderstood as a kind of constant performance. Living in the end does not mean denying your current circumstances or pretending, in conversation with others, that things have already changed. It means something more interior than that. It means that as you move through your actual day, making purchases, having conversations, encountering the ordinary friction of life, you carry with you the feeling established in your imaginal practice, rather than abandoning it the moment you re enter the world of appearances. If your desire is for financial ease, this does not mean spending money you do not have or pretending to others that your circumstances have changed. It means that as you handle the actual money you actually have, you do so with the unhurried confidence of someone for whom money is not a source of anxiety, because in the deeper reality you are constructing, it is not. It means that when a bill arrives, you do not collapse into the old feeling of scarcity, but meet it from the new feeling of sufficiency, not through denial, but through the simple refusal to let an external event dictate your internal state. This is a genuine shift in your way of being, not a performance layered over an unchanged interior. And it is demanding precisely because it is genuine. The old patterns of feeling are familiar, well worn, automatic. The new ones require attention, gentle, persistent, returning attention, until they too become automatic. I want to address something that often produces confusion, because the teaching of assumption can sound, to an unfamiliar ear, like an instruction to do nothing. It is not. But it transforms the nature of action entirely. Action taken from the consciousness of lack, from the feeling of, I do not have this and I am trying to get it, carries that consciousness into everything it touches. It is the action of someone reaching across a gap, and every such action, however well intentioned, reinforces the felt reality of the gap. This is why so much effort produces so little, not because effort is wrong, but because effort applied from within the old assumption simply produces more of the old assumption's evidence, dressed up as activity. Action taken from the assumption of fulfillment is different in kind, not merely in degree. It does not feel like reaching, it feels like following. An impulse that arises naturally from the state you are now occupying, pointing towards something that feels, in the moment, almost obvious. You are not trying to make something happen. You are simply moving in the direction that the person you have become would naturally move. This is the relationship between assumption and action that matters. The assumption comes first, and the right actions arises from it, easily, often surprisingly, sometimes in directions your previous self would never have considered. Do not neglect action, but do not mistake busyness for creation. The busyness of someone still operating from lack, however vigorous, builds only more lack. The natural movement of someone living from fulfillment builds the world that movement belongs to. There is a quality that must accompany this practice, and it is often mistaken for its opposite. Detachment, in this context, does not mean not caring, it means not anxiously monitoring. It means not treating the absence of immediate visible results as evidence against the assumption you are building. The anxious checking, the daily scanning of circumstances for proof that the practice is working, is itself an assumption, and the assumption it expresses is I do not yet have this. Every act of checking reinforces precisely the state you are trying to move beyond. Detachment is the natural consequence of genuinely believing what you are doing. If the imaginal act, infused with feeling, is the actual creative event, the cause, then the visible world is simply the effect, arriving in its own time, by its own paths. You do not need to verify that a seed is growing by digging it up. You attend to the planting and the watering, and you allow the growth to occur in the dark, according to its own nature, on its own schedule. This detachment is not coldness toward your desire. It is, in fact, the deepest form of confidence in it, confidence so complete that anxious verification becomes unnecessary. There is a particular use of gratitude that belongs to this practice, and it is different from gratitude as it is commonly understood. Ordinarily, gratitude follows receiving. Something good happens and you feel thankful for it. But there is another form of gratitude, gratitude that precedes the visible event, that is felt for something, not because it has appeared in the physical world, but because it is already real in consciousness, and consciousness is the primary reality. To feel genuine gratitude for your desire before its outer appearance is to assume, in the deepest sense, that it is already yours. It is an embodiment of the state of having, expressed through the most natural emotional response to having. And because the subconscious responds to feeling, this gratitude, genuinely felt, not performed, becomes one of the most direct expressions of the assumption itself. This is not gratitude as a technique for attracting things, as though thankfulness were a kind of currency the universe accepts. It is gratitude as the natural feeling tone of someone living in the end, and as such, it is both an expression of the assumption and a reinforcement of it. I want to introduce something that Neville considered essential and which is often overlooked in discussions of manifestation, the practice of revision. At the close of each day, before sleep, review the day's events, not with judgment and not to dwell on what went wrong, but to identify any moments that fell short of the state you are cultivating and to revise them. Not to deny that they occurred in the physical world, they occurred, and nothing about this practice asks you to pretend otherwise, but to recognize that the past, as it exists in your consciousness, is not fixed. It is simply another impression, available to be revised the same way any other impression is. If a conversation went poorly, replay it, not as it happened, but as you wish it had happened. Feel the satisfaction of the revised version as genuinely as you would feel it if it were the version that had actually occurred. This is not self-deception about external facts. It is the recognition that what shapes your future is not the external fact, but the impression the event leaves on your subconscious. And that impression, unlike the external fact, remains entirely within your authority to determine. Practiced consistently, revision does something remarkable. It gradually changes not only what impressions you carry forward, but how you respond to events as they occur. You become less reactive, not because events have become less significant, but because you have stopped allowing every event to dictate, unedited, what gets impressed upon the deepest part of your mind. Desires manifest at different speeds, and this variability often becomes a source of doubt If this works, why hasn't it worked yet for this particular thing? The honest answer is that the speed of manifestation depends on the relationship between the new assumption and the old one it is replacing. Some assumptions face little resistance. They manifest with startling speed almost as soon as they are genuinely held. Others are displacing years, sometimes decades of contrary impression. And the displacement takes time, not because the law is slower in these cases, but because more has to be undone before the new assumption is the dominant one. Persistence in this context is not struggle. It is not the white knuckle determination of someone forcing themselves to keep trying something that isn't working. It is the quiet, repeated return to the feeling of the wish fulfilled, especially in moments when the outer world seems most to contradict it. Each return is not a fresh attempt at something that failed before. It is a deepening of the groove. And the groove, deepened enough times, becomes the dominant pattern, regardless of how many times the outer world, in its lag, continued to display the old one. I want to address something that lies beneath everything else we have discussed, because without it, even a correctly performed practice can fail to take root. Many people attempt to assume a desired state, while beneath that attempt, holding an unexamined belief that they are not the kind of person to whom that state belongs. They visualize wealth while believing, somewhere beneath the visualization, that wealth is not for people like them. They imagine love while carrying, unexamined, a conviction of their own unworthiness. This contradiction is fatal to the practice, not because the law fails, but because the deeper assumption about self is more dominant than the surface assumption about circumstance, and the subconscious responds to the dominant impression. This means that the most fundamental revision available to you is not the revision of a single desire, but the revision of your self concept, the felt sense of who you are, what you are capable of, what kind of life belongs to someone like you. This is not about constructing a false image of yourself. It is about recognizing what you actually are beneath every layer of history and circumstance. Consciousness itself, the awareness in which all experience, past, present, future, appears. This awareness is not limited by what has happened to it. It is not defined by what it has not yet experienced. It is in its essential nature without the boundaries that the accumulated self-concept has placed upon it. When you assume a desired state while also revising the underlying self-concept, when you feel not only I have this, but I am the kind of being for whom this is natural, you remove the contradiction that has been quietly undermining the practice. The two assumptions align, and aligned assumptions, unlike contradictory ones, produce their corresponding circumstances without the friction of internal conflict. As we come to a close, I want to return to where we began, because I believe it is worth holding on to as the single thread that ties everything together. You are not learning a technique for getting things. You are recognizing, and gradually, through practice, coming to know rather than merely believe, that you are the operant power in your own experience, that the world you live in is not happening to you, but happening from you continuously through the assumptions you hold, most of which you absorb without choosing, and can now, with attention and persistence, choose differently. This recognition does not make life effortless, in the sense of removing all activity, all engagement, all movement, but it removes the deepest kind of effort, the effort of fighting against a world you believe to be separate from you and indifferent to your desires. What remains is a different kind of engagement entirely. The engagement of someone who is not struggling against the current, but discovering, with each deliberate assumption, that they were always the one determining which direction the current flows. Choose your assumptions, then, with the seriousness this understanding deserves, not anxiously. Seriousness and anxiety are not the same thing, but with the quiet attentiveness of someone who has finally understood what they have been doing all along, and who is no longer willing to do it by accident. The seeds you plant tonight, in the quiet, in the feeling,